interesting to me, though, is how few people wanted to challenge their own views. And it's not just on COVID or the quote-unquote pandemic, but it's on many things. Have you noticed that only a minority at any given time want to kind of hold up a mirror and kind of look at really what it is that they believe and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's been my experience. I mean, it's nothing, you know, I don't pass personal judgment on people, although people need to realize that it's, you know, truth is independent of whether you like somebody or you don't like somebody, you know, and most people just can't judge the facts and objective reality independent of the actors involved. So that's why you see frequently, you know, oh, you know, this was under Biden, and you know, I'm talking about the U.S. now. Yeah, this was under Biden. Everything is bad under Biden, but everything is good under Trump. While exactly the same things are happening, exactly the same, and possibly even worse. Yeah, but it's not, no, because Trump is doing it. It's good, but you know, and that's just you know, fighting it continuously is the most exhausting part of this whole thing, and I'm sure you realize that too, right? It's the most exhausting part because you deal with people who previously you thought, oh wow, that, you know, he understands what's going on, intelligent, very good analysis, and then the political party switches and it's like this, and I'm like, what happened to you? You know, and they're not necessarily, you know, bought or, you know, money is involved or some kind of bribes or blackmail. That's very, very rare when that actually is there. It literally is people somehow just can't criticize somebody that they politically support or like or follow, and they just can't criticize their actions because there's like, oh my God, then I'm a bad person somehow. No, you're not a bad person. You're just pointing to facts.
That's the thing about Trump. He's like a Pied Piper, and I like some of the things that he says and does, and I dislike other things that he says and does. It's not binary. It's not I either love him or I hate him. But he is effectively middle management. He doesn't have as much power as people think. I mean, the most obvious way to see this is we can all agree that Joe Biden was, you know, senile and he couldn't speak in full sentences. And there's no ways that he was running the show. So if he wasn't running the show, other people were. So what makes you think that suddenly Trump is running the show?
That's right. Right, exactly. And I mean, the best way to describe it is it's a theater, or like they call it kayfabe from, you know, the fights, the orchestrated fights in this whole, you know, entertainment genre. And yeah, because I think the puppeteers behind the scenes, or whoever control the governments, which is clearly not people like Trump, not the visible political actors, no matter how popular they are. They're never in control. And so the puppeteers, they know this tendency of people to, you know, fall in love with some political character and then use that to continue the same agenda, the same narrative, the same actions, you know, subversion of freedom, removal of rights, all that. With the new actor that, you know, that previously the Democrats were all gung-ho on everything that Biden was endorsing, and the Republicans were fighting. Now it's the time to switch the actors so we can bring this crowd of cattle now to where we need them, right? So that's exactly how they like switch the actors, but the goal, you know, they're pushing the ball to the goal together, these both teams, you know, so. And people just can't wrap their heads around it. And I'm asking everyone to, you know, you can hate me. It's fine. Hate me all you want. But let's talk about facts. Let's talk about actions. Let's not talk about, oh my God, like another one. I just currently I can't stand this. The new MAHA Make America Healthy Again policy. It's a total propaganda piece, and I called it out right again when they came out with it in September 2024. So this is while Trump was still running before the election, when RFK Jr. agreed to join his campaign. At some point, very shortly afterwards, they published this Make America Healthy Again campaign policy, which later became the health policy, and that was immediately obvious. It was written by pharma lobbyists, and it was written by pharma lobbyists. It was written by Kelly Means, who's a pharma lobbyist and who works for Susie Wiles, who's now essentially running the government. She's chief of staff for Trump, and she's also a huge pharma lobbyist. And it was clear. It was clear as day, right? And I published and I said, this is just propaganda, and it continues being propaganda. And still today, the people that I previously respected publishing articles saying, "Oh my gosh, the ACIP Advisory Committee on Vaccination Practices was deceived by CDC. Look, they pulled the wool over their eyes, and they all, CDC lied to them. Can you imagine? It's so shocking. Who could predict that?" And how much of an idiot do you have to be to fall for this, right? And these people call themselves experts, epidemiological experts, who understand the data, who can read the data. Yet, CDC pushes total garbage in front of them, which millions of people, lay people, have no problem picking apart and understanding what's what. Somehow big experts can't. They were deceived. They voted to approve monoclonal antibody for all newborns in the United States. All healthy newborns need to be injected on the first day of birth with yet another poison. This is hugely poisonous, monoclonal antibody. It's disaster. They all voted yes. This product killed more babies in clinical trial than whatever was used for control. That was clear as day. It was clear as day to all of us. Yet this big group of experts gets from MAHA, appointed by RFK Jr., get in a room. They get put in front of them this complete piece of garbage, and they all vote yes. So, and everybody then hates me for pointing this out and calls me pharma shill, calls me controlled opposition, calls me a spy, calls me whatever, because I just say, what are we supposed to do here? How can they call themselves experts? And that's my problem. So this all the time. I point out these things all the time. Again, because people are in love with their political favorites, and they can't get it together that it doesn't matter what you love, who you love. Now they're part of the government. Now they're going to be working for pharma, and your job is to call their BS now.
Speaking of being a pharma shill, what is your background?
Oh yeah, pharma shill. Yeah, no, I was never a pharma shill, but I worked as a contractor in pharmaceutical industry. So I ran several companies performing clinical trials for pharma companies. For the pharma companies as clients, and worked with FDA as part of this, because you submit data to the FDA. So my expertise is I understand the regulations, how they're supposed to be done, what happens in practice in regulatory environments, and obviously how to read the data from clinical trials. And also anybody professional in the industry is under no illusion that manufacturers are again, you can't expect a manufacturer to be honest. That's why we have regulators, because manufacturers are biased by definition. By if they put the product on the market, they make profit from it, and that's why we have regulators, to keep that in check. And now we're being told that the manufacturer produced data that was copy pasted by CDC and pushed in front of the experts. Somehow it's insurmountable for an expert to look at it and say, I don't believe it, and do their own analysis, their independent analysis, as experts should.
Well, speaking of expert analysis, tell me what happened in the Netherlands.
All right. So this is an ongoing case, or rather two cases. So this was two cases in the Netherlands. One was started about 2 years ago, and it's ongoing. It's for 7 victims of COVID injections who got together, and this law firm is prosecuting the case for them. In general, it alleges that the government officials in the Netherlands colluded with pharmaceutical companies and NGOs and WHO and other governmental and non-governmental organizations to conduct genocide or democide. And it's extensively documented. It has very, very good set of evidence. People have been injured. People have been lied to by the government officials. It names several government officials in the Netherlands, including the Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, who is now actually head of NATO, and the other health officials, and also Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, and Bill Gates as defendants. And this is the case where the judge actually ruled that Bill Gates can't get out of this case. So he's still part of the defendants. And then the second case was started. There are additional 3 plaintiffs who wanted, so there is a legal procedure in the Netherlands, which I was told by the lawyers that really you can't even lose that procedure. So you are allowed to bring a set of experts to the judge, and experts would testify that, for example, there's this case, we are looking into our options of how to prosecute this case, and that's why we're bringing the experts to the judge to get advice. So it's kind of like you're seeking legal advice from a judge, which in principle nobody should refuse, and I was told that historically this is, you can't lose this. Now, the lawyers proposed that the experts include myself, Catherine Watt, my colleague. She publishes on Substack Bailiwick News, and she has an extensive collection of U.S. law, primarily related to vaccinations. And going back 200 years, it's a legal encyclopedia on this matter. And then Mike Eden in the UK, he was formerly a high-level executive at Pfizer, so very experienced in toxicology and drug development, again, regulatory affairs. And Catherine Austin Fitz, who is a publisher of Solari Report. She's former U.S. government official under Bush. She was in housing development, and now she was an investment banker. She's very experienced in finance, and so she now writes her own publication, which is very popular. And then Dr. Joe Sanson in Florida, and so the 6th expert was Professor Francis Boyle. He's a U.S. He's academic, and he was expert on bioweapons law because he helped draft several international bioweapons prohibition conventions. He agreed to testify in this case that specifically on the question that these measures and COVID shots were bioweapons. And, his agreement, in 3 weeks after he agreed to that, he was suddenly dead. And we don't know why. We still don't know. Nobody knows his cause of death. But he died 3 weeks after he agreed to testify in this case, and on behalf of plaintiffs. And he was perfectly healthy as far as we knew. He was in his 70s, and he was teaching full time. So then, the lawyers submitted this request to the judge saying, we have these 3 plaintiffs, we would like a speedy decision on this. Here are the experts that are willing to testify. Mentioned that Francis Boyle suddenly died, and this is very concerning. And the hearing was last week, and the judge refused to hear us as experts, which is very, very unusual. Again, as I said, this is a procedure that technically just, you just get in front of the judge and they advise you how to file your case. In this case, they didn't want us to even, they didn't want anything to do with this. They refused. So we knew, we were anticipating that they would refuse. And so we are now following another strategy. It's going to be much more publicly visible. Before we were staying quiet, we didn't want to influence the judge's decision, but now that she's decided, we are going more public, and there's going to be more public communication about it. And the cases will likely merge, these two cases, the 7 victims and 3 additional victims. So that's where we are right now. But this is a very big deal and very big case, and people should pay attention to it.
I can't believe Francis died. I didn't know that. I think he was on my show when I was still at TNT Radio.
Yeah, he died. Again, we don't know what.
I'm just looking it up now.
Huh?
Yeah, I'm just looking it up now. I can't believe it.
Yeah. So I think it was in February or end of January. I forget the date exactly.
Gee. Hey, Sasha? That's crazy.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So that's my that's my point. How serious this is, right?
Do you think he died mysteriously?
To me, this is very mysterious because when a apparently healthy person who is working full time, teaching full time, speaking, agreeing to testify 3 weeks later is found dead, and we don't know how, this as suspicious as it gets.
Sure, that's derailed me a little bit here. Actually, let's just take a segue here. For those in my UK column audience that don't know you or your work, just very quickly, what is your background?
All right. So, as I said, I spent about 25 years in pharmaceutical and medical device research and development, clinical trials primarily, and, running different clinical trials in oncology, actually across all disease categories, in oncology a lot, and in cardiovascular disease a lot. In cardiovascular specifically, I worked several years in safety, so assessments of safety only. So that cuts across all the therapeutic areas because there are specific requirements for cardiovascular safety assessments, which I can tell you totally were completely ignored in case of these COVID shots, and actually they are completely ignored in case of all vaccines. They don't even apply to vaccines. So that's how safe they are. You can't even test them for safety. I didn't know that. I didn't know that prior to 2020 because I never worked in vaccines. I worked in drugs, and I assumed, like a lot of my colleagues, including Mike Eden, also very high-level executive advisor, we all thought that all of the stuff that we have to comply with applies to vaccines. It turns out no, and actually, that it's a longer story, but it was never applicable, and by design. And then, I, as I said, I ran several companies. I sold them. I retired fully around maybe 2017 and 18. I just didn't need to work. I wasn't interested in that anymore. And I was just having a great time. I was, enjoying myself, doing sports and art and just traveling and living my life. And then in 2020, I became increasingly concerned with the government actions, particularly when they started suppressing generic drugs for treatment of whatever COVID illness is. People argue about that. It doesn't matter. If people are ill and there are generic drugs that are known very, very safe with long history on the market, we always prefer those. We prefer something that is known and has been used for a long time and is well documented to something completely new. And so when they started saying that, oh no, you can't use hydroxychloroquine, but you have to wait for this mRNA shot, I was like, whoa, wait. I have to pay attention to this, and I started paying attention. I started looking into this, and my first I first was concerned, and I just kind of thought that it's BS and they are overreacting. When they started rolling out these mRNA shots, well, I personally knew that they were super toxic drugs. And from my history in pharma, and I was like, there's no way in hell I'm touching this, and my family is not touching this, so I don't worry about myself. But I was just concerned that they're pushing this on the public, and I started doing analysis of VAERS data, because that's the only publicly available vaccine adverse event reporting system from CDC. And I started analyzing it, and I was the first person who discovered the batch variability, so that these mRNA shots had unbelievably humongous variability in terms of toxicity batch to batch. Because some batches had, very few adverse events and deaths, and some had thousands. And that should never, ever, ever happen for any pharmaceutical product or mass-produced product of any kind. Because you don't want to go and, get a beer in a bar, and this week and next week you go there and it's 1,000 times alcohol, right? It's gonna kill you. So for that reason, all the consumer products are tightly controlled. You should never see this type of variability. Yet this was the magnitude of variability that we saw with these shots. And so I was the first one to publish on it. I was the first one to, promote it, and we built a website, and, it became very popular. It's a well-known fact now, but the FDA has not addressed it. Ever. They never acknowledged it, and they since have never addressed it. Nothing has been done about it under any administration.
I remember coming across your Substack a few years ago, and I actually didn't take it very seriously because I saw your art and I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at. And I think it took me maybe about another year or so to go back to your Substack and start actually reading some of your articles.
Well, you didn't like my art?
No, I did like your art, but it didn't. No. What I mean is that it wasn't joining any dots for me.
Okay.
Until I started reading your articles on Substack, and suddenly it felt like it was a whole new paradigm. Nobody was talking about what you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And there was one other person, Debbie Lerman from Brownstone, and but very few other people were actually suggesting that the whole COVID event was actually a military operation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Quickly summarize that for me.
All right. So first, for the longest time, myself and Catherine Watt, we were, we don't run Substack together, but we were collaborating because she was providing a lot of law information, and I was looking from the regulatory perspective. So we were the only people who were publishing on this at all. And I originally published Intent to Harm. I think I realized that this was a military operation when I was talking to Brooke Jackson, and she's a whistleblower. She was prosecuting. She is still prosecuting this case, but it's kind of like very, not going anywhere. She was prosecuting case against Pfizer, and she's also from pharma industry. And at some point, she sent me these files that were produced by the CDC or FDA or somebody as part of the legal proceedings, and they included a PowerPoint from presented at the Vaccine Advisory Committee of the FDA sometime in late 2020. And when I read this PowerPoint, it became obvious to me from one slide, they put organizational chart of Operation Warp Speed. And this organizational chart was kind of funny. It was turned on the side. Usually it's like CEO, and then you have this pyramid, right? They turned the pyramid on the side to make it less obvious. But on the side, the chief operating officer of this whole thing was the Department of Defense. So there's this logo of the Department of Defense. And then next to it, it says HHS, which is Health and Human Services Department, is advisor. While to the public, it was always presented as this is a public health event, and it's all about virus and illness and vaccines, and you're a bad person if you're endangering your grandma without wearing the mask and all that, right? So but that org chart said completely the opposite thing. It said that this is a military-controlled exercise where HHS is alone for the ride and providing, advice, but it's being managed by the Department of Defense. And furthermore, there was a whole executive layer to this org chart that consisted entirely of the U.S. government, mainly executive branch departments of the government, including various state and security and things like that. So when I looked at it, I was like, wow, this is just really strange. I've never seen anything like this. Clearly, military is in control. And then I started digging into that. And Debbie Lerman was the person I found through this. She's also writing on Substack. She was writing on Brownstone Institute publication at that time. And she wrote one article where she found documentation from the United States government. This document was very obscure. It was linked to a New York Times article. That's where she found it. And it's called Pandemic Action Plan. So U.S. government at some point put together action plan for what happens if we have a pandemic. And that action plan was originally written as a public health document with more or less normal public health things. And it said something like, well, you don't do lockdowns and masking is not helpful. You just advise public not to panic, wash their hands and stay home if sick. So normal things like that. You don't close the schools, and so it was normal, more or less normal public health document. And sometime during, maybe shortly before 2020, literally months before 2020, the document was changed somehow. Nobody still knows how. She is, by the way, still trying to FOIA how that happened, but this has been like years, and she's having a really hard time. That document was changed, and now it's called Pandemic Action Plan Adapted. Who adapted it and what process, we don't know. But the adapted plan was completely opposite. So all of the public health things went away. And now she found another org chart in it, which is another very, very confusing one. But if you kind of go through it, you understand. And we've done several videos on this as well, walking people through this. So in that org chart, it said specifically that National Security Council was in charge of pandemic response. And that's even worse than Department of Defense being in charge. So clearly it says that National Security Council is the CEO, because they remember in the org chart that I saw, where I started this investigation, the chief operating officer was the Department of Defense. But above Department of Defense, we have National Security Council. National Security Council is advisory body to the U.S. president, and it consists of heads of military and intelligence services, or agencies, and vice president and the president. Nobody else. It doesn't have any health representatives on it, so they're not allowed in. You have to have a very high security clearance to be on it. So that was the body, and that body usually advises the president on matters of war and foreign policy, not on health. Somehow, in this adapted pandemic action plan, we have them in charge of the COVID pandemic response. And so what happened is then ultimately our investigation, at some point somebody sent me whistleblower tape from inside AstraZeneca executive meeting at the end of 2020. And in this tape, it was recorded from a Zoom call. I have a video of the Zoom, but I separated the video from the audio, and I only released the audio because I didn't want to inadvertently do something to reveal who recorded it, because obviously it was an internal meeting at the company. And so I released the audio and I published it on my Substack. In this recording, 6 minutes from the Zoom meeting, there are two speakers, the CEO of AstraZeneca, Pascal Soro, and VP of monoclonal antibodies, Mark Esser. And they're, high-fiving each other, celebrating the approval of their monoclonal antibody, which was approved in the US. Their vaccine was never approved in the US. It was approved in the UK and other places. But in the US, they only got the monoclonal approved. And so during this discussion, they're kind of like revisiting the history of what happened. And they said, so at some point, Mark Esser says, we were approached by DARPA, which is part of Department of Defense. It's DARPA is Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And specifically, Colonel Matt Hepburn of DARPA approached them in 2017 and said that we're starting a consortium between pharmaceutical companies and the Department of Defense to work on pandemic products. And, Department of Defense will identify viruses of pandemic potential, and you, the pharma, will be making vaccines and therapeutics for it within 60 days. To which Mark Esser said, I thought it was science fiction at first. And that's a correct reaction, because it is science fiction, because there is no science today, it never was, that can, from a computer model of a virus, tell you how pandemic potential it is. None. It's not possible to do. And there are actually extensive sets of literature confirming it, including large reports and books published by National Academies of Science, including Ralph Baric as a co-author, saying specifically, we do not know how to model pandemic potential viruses. How to predict whether they're going to be pandemic potential or not. And the only way to predict or to understand it is an actual interaction of humans with that virus, if you believe in viruses. So you can't prospectively determine when something is going to cause pandemics. Yet this is what Matt Hepburn was enticing pharmaceutical companies to agree to participate in, which is a deception. It's a fake. For money, obviously. And of course they agreed for money, even though Mark Esser expressed his reservations. Doesn't matter. The Department of Defense waived a lot of dollars, and they said, okay, it's fine. And so they started participating in this. And in 2020, then Mark Esser again says that on February 4th, 2020, we received a phone call from DARPA telling us, probably Hepburn himself again, telling them that COVID was declared a national security threat. So this is what's happened. On February 4th, somebody inside the US government, we still don't know who, identified this COVID virus, which did not exist at the time in the US. There were barely, maybe a handful of cases PCR identified. PCR is not diagnostic. You can't use it for diagnosis. And so we didn't have any illness, no deaths, nothing was happening. Yet somebody in the US government determined that this is a national security threat, classified everything, put National Security Council in charge so that nobody from any, agencies that were actually implementing anything could even know how those decisions are made, because they don't have the top clearance, and proceeded to democide the entire world from here. So that's what, I identified and Debbie Lerman identified, and we eventually published the COVID dossier, where we are now, given this evidence where we started from, we also collected the corresponding evidence from all over the world. Now we have pretty much every region of the world covered, where we're listing all the agencies that were in charge, how decisions were made, key timelines, key people, so linked to source documents. And in every single country we looked at, the identical formula is used. Is equivalent of national security apparatus is put in charge of the response. The military is running the operation as the execution, as the chief operating officer in logistics and distribution, manufacturing, all of that. The laws that are used for what's called countermeasures, which is a military term. All of these COVID products are countermeasures, and there are equivalent laws in other countries that treat these products as countermeasures, which removes them from any regulation that applies to consumer products and pharmaceuticals completely, and also removes any liability from anyone who is a covered person who is doing these procedures, products, protocols, enforcement, anything, regardless of how many people they kill or injure. And that's how all of these laws are written, and that's how all this framework is in place, and it continues. It never stopped, actually. It continues.
I remember back in March 2020 when our president went on TV to announce we're going to have lockdown for 21 days. We're going to flatten the curve.
Flatten curve, yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Yes. And it just coincidentally happened in the same week that the UK also locked down, Sasha. It's just a coincidence.
Coincidence, yeah.
And I remember somebody sent me a WhatsApp video within 2 hours after the president announced the lockdown. A video from one of the townships. What's the international term? A squatter camp. So we call it a township, but it's the poor areas. And it was military vehicles with guys soldiers on the top carrying guns and shouting at everybody, telling them to go indoors. Now, I mean, that was very quick.
Yeah.
You know?
Look at what happened and what they did in Australia. That was probably the most tyrannical of all, Western countries. It was incredible, and there's footage of what they were doing. And how can anybody in their right mind believe that this is about a virus or some sort of respiratory illness?
Yeah, just quickly, because you know the kinds of people that follow us, Sasha. You've mentioned the word virus a few times. You've said pandemic a couple times. Let's just quickly clarify. In your view, was there a pandemic?
No. There was never a pandemic. As I said, this is a military operation, and as I said, they enticed pharma companies, the DoD, DARPA, enticed pharma companies to participate in the fake. And in fact, this is how it's called by WHO. It's Public Health Emergency of International Concern, which is pronounced fake. All right? So they like to do these kind of Easter eggs to laugh at peasants who fall for their BS. They orchestrated a fake. And I actually have written a series of articles. It's called How to Fake Pandemics. So it's a 4-part series, and I have some other additional material. 4-part series explaining exactly the script used by the DoD and used by the governments and academia to fake pandemics. It's not the first time they did it, but I would say they faked epidemics, not necessarily they didn't call it pandemic. Definition of pandemic, if you believe in such a thing, I don't. They don't exist, by the way. They only faked. But the definition that they use, it's a severe illness with lots of deaths occurring simultaneously all over the world, or at least in several major regions of the world. And such thing has never happened in the world history, ever. There have been local outbreaks of what is considered infectious disease, most of it based on polluted water, especially water polluted with sewage, whether humans or animals or both, open sewage somewhere nearby. So those are typically the sources of these kinds of illnesses like cholera, the plague, smallpox, and they're also the insects are vectors involved in this. And I also write articles explaining how that happens, as opposed to other commentators who don't. They just say there are no viruses, but they don't provide an explanation, right? I do. But as I said, but in this case, these are faked, and there is a very, very well-known DoD script on how to do it. And there is one particular propagandist from DoD called James Giordano. He's a professor of neuroscience, Johns Hopkins, I believe. And so there's a bunch of lectures by him on YouTube. He does lectures to military cadets, brainwashing them on various topics. And in one of these lectures, several actually, he mentions the script of faking pandemics. And that's exactly what they did, in my opinion. So it wasn't a real event. There wasn't any real virus or communicable illness spreading. There was a lot of things that the governments did. So my personal view, my personal theory is they followed Giordano's script, which involves some use of chemical weapons, such as they can use pesticides as chemical weapons. They can use metals. They've used aerosolized metals and metal particles quite a bit. U.S. Army did continuously. And they can produce respiratory illness. So, like, for example, there is a known saying, it's called welder's flu. So in welding, when you're working with metals, you may inhale aerosolized metal, and it causes flu. So there's a flu, but there's no virus. It's caused by metal inhalation, and it's one of the ways to simulate it. So he says, we use some kind of a simulant to produce unusual symptoms in people in some locations, so that then the media can pick it up, and with the whole media propaganda campaign, we can create a lot of panic. And then, because this media campaign targets what he specifically calls as hypochondriacs. And he says those people, when they hear these stories and they see the listing of the symptoms, including everything, you are symptomatic, you're worried, you are panicked, you are, you can't sleep very well, it means you have that deadly virus, right? So then those people actually start having symptoms. That's another known effect. It's known in psychiatry and it's known in hypnosis that a large percentage of the population, somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the fear factor, are very susceptible to this kind of propaganda, and they will develop symptoms if you tell them. They're suggestible, so you can tell them and they'll develop those symptoms. And so he says this is what it's designed to produce in the society, so that then those people run to the hospitals and get tested with PCR, which, as you know, is very easy to manipulate and set to put the settings at high cycles so that it will find positive. And there you go. That's how you fake the pandemics. That's how they did it.
Trump is a bit of a blockhead who likes swinging his dick and typing in uppercase letters the whole time, Sasha. And he was the president in 2020. Do you think he knew what was going on before March?
Before March, there's a video where he's visibly surprised. So there's on March 2020, there's a video of him where he's visibly surprised by Mike Pompeo saying where this is a live exercise. So what I think happened is he was briefed in just enough to sign off on Stafford Act declaration, which is what was needed to announce the state of public health emergency in all 50 states simultaneously. This hasn't been used ever in U.S. history. This law has not been used across 50 states simultaneously. And
Deborah Birx, she was part of it, wasn't she?
Yes, Deborah Birx was part of it. So what I think, and Deborah Birx, by the way, she's not public health. She is the spokes, State Department. CIA, yeah. So she was actually quite instrumental. And Debbie Lerman wrote a great book. It's called Deep State Goes Viral, detailing her activities very well, and other key actors that people don't realize. Everybody yells at Fauci and wants to hang Fauci, which, well, I mean, I think he should be prosecuted for crimes, but he definitely wasn't in charge of this thing.
He was just a pawn.
He was just a pawn. Yeah,
he was a pawn.
He was a very experienced advisor on these matters, but he didn't make any decisions. Deborah Birx is much more important in this picture. And so I think they brought actors like her and a bunch of others, perhaps, and they somehow convinced Trump enough or briefed him enough to say, well, yeah, let's do this. But they probably said something like it's a drill to him. They said, well, we need this. I don't know what they told him, but he probably was under impression that this is some sort of a drill. And then when Mike Pompeo said it's a live exercise, that's what, visibly got him to say, oh, you should have told us, So probably that's what happened. And it was also clear, it was also clear from several Pentagon videos that I reviewed that he was not in charge at all. It was Department of Defense running ahead of him, but they were kind of managing him to think that he was making decisions. So there were several instances where, for example, $50 billion were distributed to pharma companies before he authorized it. And that got him pissed off. But he couldn't do anything meaningful about it, which again says that he wasn't in charge. And so that's how I see it. He he definitely knows now. So definitely, there's no question in my mind. It shouldn't be in anybody's mind that he's not in on this game now. He is. Maybe he probably was enraged that they didn't like cut him in, right? And now he's somehow reimbursed.
Do you remember? But do you remember that 180 that he did on Twitter? Like within a space of 2 or 3 days, his whole approach changed very dramatically.
Yeah. He was resisting the lockdowns for a long time. Well, not a long time, but initially he was resisting lockdowns. And at some point, I think Jeffrey Tucker from Brownstone went and reviewed his tweets around that time and found this switch around March 10th. So I think that's when they brought in, and Debbie Lerman and others think that it was Tucker Carlson who went to Mar-a-Lago and told him something that changed his mind. So that's what I'm saying. They somehow manipulated with Tucker Carlson, with Deborah Birx, whoever, manipulated him enough by March 10th to go ahead with lockdowns. Again, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Maybe he thought that it was 2 weeks, I don't know. To sign off on Stafford Act and to start this whole thing. And afterwards, they didn't care. They didn't care anymore. And so he had to just be surprised, and then they probably told him additional stuff, and now he's fully on board.
What makes this whole thing so interesting also is that the mainstream and even many alternative narratives completely avoid the military aspect. And what that means is that they look in the wrong direction. They keep looking at Fauci. They keep looking at Bill Gates. Now they look at Wuhan. Since Trump came in, suddenly it's Wuhan. And remember on the White House's website, on the front page, it said it was a lab leak. And there's a picture of Trump and he's the hero. And the whole thing now is the lab leak, and it's China again. That's the other red flag. Like, why is it always China? Do people not see through this?
Exactly. Why can people see through this? Because, by the way, this whole China virus, do you think this is recent invention? Well, they did the same thing in the 50s. And they've done it a dozen times now. The CDC together with the military. The same script has been done millions of times. And that's actually written into DoD documents that, if anything, if we do, so I reviewed U.S. Army documentation, available documentation on their official biological weapons development program, which they had between end of the Second World War in the late 40s. Actually, I think they even started in 43 or something. So from 1943 to 1969 to Bioweapons Convention, when Nixon signed off on it, they had an official bioweapons development program at the U.S. Army funded, and several locations where they were doing it. The main one is Fort Detrick in Maryland. And they were working together with the UK and Canada all that from the start. They were was always collaboration between UK, US, and Canada, and they did operations together and tests together. And so I reviewed that documentation, and their policy was always we do some tests either in the US or in Canada or in the UK. We do the tests with these agents. If anything happens and there is like public outcry, we blame China. Number one, we blame China. It's a China virus. Yeah, it's their policy.
Always.
So it's always China. If it's not China, it's Russia or Iran. Okay, that's that sequence. China, Russia, Iran. And that's their policy.
And people don't see through it.
And everybody falls for it. Again, with this, Gulf virus, I can't believe how many people in this health freedom, which I now call health greedom movement, they're just grifting off of this, recycling these nonsense headlines that China engineered virus leaked from Wuhan. I'm sick of it. I wrote about this a long time ago, actually 2.5 years ago. I wrote an article when they first sort of allowed this headline that oh, it wasn't a natural virus. It wasn't evolved. I remember for about 2 years, it was a zoonotically evolved virus from Chinese bat Wuhan wet market, right? And everybody was supposed to believe it. And if you said, I don't believe it, or published something contrary on the internet, as I did, you immediately were banned. And I was banned on Twitter right away. And you know, so initially it would be like a lot of bots would appear, swarm you, start, you know, creating nonsense. Yeah, it was just total BS, and it was obviously designed to suppress this. But if anybody was questioning zoonosis, they were immediately banned. Now, then 2 years, a little bit later, Tucker Carlson starts coming out. Oh, and then they had this whole James O'Keefe. Remember the James O'Keefe incident with the
yes.
with a guy from Pfizer who went on a date with James O'Keefe. And
yes, I remember that. It was undercover.
Undercover date with James O'Keefe, this guy from Pfizer, pretending to, which, by the way, wasn't a Pfizer employee. It was a BCG, Boston Consulting Group employee. It's Boston Consulting Group Federal. Okay, federal division of the Boston Consulting Group person placed at Pfizer to pretend that he's some sort of a scientist, to go with James O'Keefe to record this whole nonsense where he's like, oh, Pfizer's mutating viruses in the lab. And then Tucker Carlson is all like, oh my God. And then Robert Malone is like, oh, this is so terrible. China is developing bioweapons. I mean, it was incredible, and everybody fell for it. It was circulated. We had millions and millions of views. Everybody copy pasted. At that point, I wrote an article. I said, okay, this is total baloney, you know, and I kind of debunked it. So, but then
the thing,
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So, but now, of course, Trump 2.0 comes in power, puts up a website that says, oh, it's leaked from China. It's Gulf virus leaked from China. My question is, okay, so are you going to address the fact that you were censoring everyone under your first administration? Who said that? And second of all, look at the NATO website. It still says it's a natural virus. So do you guys like talk to each other?
And the thing also, Sasha, is that what this does is that it actually protects high-level people like Deborah Birx, like Donald Trump himself, because he signed warp speed. Mm-hmm. Oh, but now, no. He's playing 5D chess. If he didn't sign warp speed, which was a choice, by the way, we all would have been in FEMA camps.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's exposing them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exposure. He's fighting globalists, you know.
But what this whole thing does is that it distracts from who the real bad people are.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely distracts from who the real bad people are. And it continues to cover up the crime. And this whole nonsense of treating it as a public health event after 5 years, clear evidence that it's not a public health event, that it has nothing to do with disease or illness. It has nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. Yet the same people are still, with humongous followings, with millions of followers, are still writing that FDA doesn't see my data. And I need to collect unimpeachable data to convince the FDA to remove these products from the market. I mean, you want to bang your head against the wall, really. I mean, this is just incredible, the amount of hubris and denial that people will stay in.
You're right, 5 years. So some comments that I have started receiving is, get over it now, it's gone. Mm-hmm. It's in the past. But I mean, is it in the past, Sasha? No. Is this something that we must just put behind us?
Oh, no, it's not in the past at all. Especially in the US and in many other countries, I advise people to check your existing law on this matter and consult with the COVID dossier, because we're listing the agencies, the relevant documents that you need to look at. And so I can tell you specifically for the US how it's not over at all. In the U.S., there is a piece of legislation that's called PrEP Act, Public Readiness Emergency something Act. And it was put on the books in 2005 by Republicans, by the way. It was opposed by Democrats. And as usual, Republicans pretended that it's not a piece of legislation, it's an appropriations bill. And at the time, there was a Katrina hurricane relief funding that was necessary. And so, as usual, they make the relief funding hostage, hold it hostage, so that the entire Congress agrees, and they slip in all these kinds of laws that they know otherwise, because they're unconstitutional and they violate several provisions of the U.S. Constitution. So they've written it up around Christmas, on the weekend, in the middle of the night, into a multi-thousand page bill that was supposed to be voted on to get the funding for Katrina relief. But the Democrats at that time, and always, they're not born yesterday, and they knew this, and they organized themselves. They got a legal opinion from a legal constitutional scholar, Edwin Chemerinsky. There's a great letter that he wrote up on this law, and then several Democratic Congress people, including Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Richard Burr, and Ted Kennedy, spoke against this bill, and they said it's unconstitutional, it violates several provisions, it removes people's rights to redress, to seek compensation for their injuries, to sue the manufacturers for liability. All correct things. I completely agree with them, because this is what this law does. But the law actually, but then they voted yes, because they couldn't, not, because otherwise, the Katrina relief funding. So since 2005, we have this monstrosity on the books, and they fully used it on the population in 2020. What it does, so it's written the following way: if several heads of executive agencies, including HHS, if HHS secretary declares, it is my opinion that there is a public health emergency of national concern, he can issue this declaration, the declaration of emergency. The declaration of emergency requires no data whatsoever. There's no justification needed for this opinion expressed by one person who is not elected, he's appointed. Appointed bureaucrat issues an opinion. And by the way, this is the same in all the countries that participated in lockstep. Your equivalent, the Minister of Health, has the same power. And they probably did that in your country to enable this. So they issued this opinion. Now we're in a state of public health emergency, or fake by who. And under this condition, it treats now the situation as if it's war. In net effect and legal effect, it enables military law to be now enacted. And from that, then they say, then the same person, HHS secretary, directs FDA to issue EUA authorizations for products for this emergency. In this case, it's all the COVID products, not just vaccines, but everything that they used: masks, swabs, PCR tests that are not validated, all the processes and protocols, such as killing people in the hospitals with remdesivir and sedatives and calling it COVID, lying to the public, especially propaganda, lying, censorship, are all COVID countermeasures. And being treated as, if I lie to you to your detriment or your death, under following the instructions of HHS, I have no liability. That's how the law is written. And you can never prosecute me. That's why no meaningful prosecution has happened in this space. Yes, there were some legal wins here and there. Mask mandates were overturned someplace. They're very, very small and meaningless. The number one, the deaths that they caused, have not been prosecuted. So, and that's why, because the entire sovereign power is behind this, saying, I authorize all these people to do this, and no matter who they kill or injure, as long as they follow my orders, they're okay. So if you remember Nuremberg trials, right? The Nazi doctors, their legal defense was, we were just following orders. And it was found that no, you can't have that legal defense if you're killing people. So the US law makes it explicitly legal to kill people as long as you follow the orders of HHS. And it's also legal to lie about it. So FDA can continue lying about it forever as long as they say it's safe and effective. They're absolved from any liability. Now, this law is enacted, all of this procedure is enacted, as long as the PrEP Act declaration for this emergency remains open, remains in place. And it remains in place. So the outgoing HHS secretary under Biden administration, Javier Becerra, extended it in December 2024 to last until December of 2029. So now we have 10 years of emergency, of national grave concern, of this respiratory virus. And so that's why it's not over, because all of this continues. That's why FDA has been approving more and more and more of these mRNA shots for COVID without placebo-controlled trials, without safety monitoring, without anything, despite the same people who are now in HHS, they were all talking against COVID vaccines. Yet the minute they showed up in HHS, yeah, complete flip, and now they're approving all these shots, and they're now going to approve self-amplifying mRNA shot as well later this year.
Stargate.
Oh, and Stargate and all that. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying it's not over. It continues. They continue lying to you. They continue lying to the public. They continue, and now the Maha propaganda operation is to label me and people like, I've been collaborating a little bit on this with the Mary Taylor Bowden and Naomi Wolf and Shannon Joy, because we were, four of us kind of got together, like we're just sick and tired of this. And they're calling us crazy and unhinged and just emotional women, and we just can't understand calm down, woman. So we just don't understand politics. The big boys understand politics better. We just don't understand politics, because if RFK Jr. removes that declaration, he's gonna get fired. I'm like, duh. Because Trump works for pharma and RFK Jr. works for Trump. I understand politics, but look, they are on pharma payroll. I'm not on pharma payroll. That's why I'm not crazy. I'm calling for these shots to be removed.
You're just an emotional woman.
I'm just an emotional woman.
Sasha, I could talk to you for hours more, but I can't if I'm looking at the time. So how can my audience follow your work?
Right. So Substack is the best place to find my work and to read my articles. I publish several times a week. And it's sashalatypova.substack.com. And my publication is called Due Diligence and Art. I also publish art piece with them. They're not related at all, but just people like the art. So.
I like your art too.
Thank you.
Sasha, as always, it's such a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you. Thank you so much.